Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode in Conversations in the Future of Work. Today, we're going to be talking about digital transformation at scale. We've spent a bit of time talking about some small business side of the world, and now we have the opportunity to speak with someone who has extensive experience with massive enterprise companies and helping them navigate through change. So, with that, I would love to introduce you to David Drodge.
Hi, I'm David Drodge, and I have been working in digital for probably 25 years now. And it's the case that from businesses big and small, but for the last probably 8 years, it's been mostly bigger businesses, and really working at a global scale. So I'm very excited to be here today.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for being here. And we're going to get started. So our first question is, I'd love for you to share with our audience members, what it is that you think the most underrated area of change for large organizations is.
Well, I think that one of the things is that even in the statement itself, you've got the fact that we don't have people in there. And people is the big factor. It really is something where, especially in large organizations, it's a lot of people, a lot of different nationalities, a lot of different parts of the business. And you actually have to kind of bring the transformation to the point where you're saying, okay, this is actually something that's relevant for me. It's really happening, because sometimes there's a little bit of like glacier move as well, and say, well, is this really going to be a transformation, or is it just something that we're hearing again? And those things are so critical to actually, making the change actually happen and stick.
Right. And I actually think this might feed directly into our next question, but I've heard a lot about some of these, companies who are like, okay, we're using AI now and here are tools. But if the change hasn't been brought to a behavioral level and the people themselves haven't been given the support they need or the infrastructure or whatever it may be, like that change is just not going to really go anywhere. Would you agree with that?
Completely. And again, it comes back to we talk a lot about people, process, technology, and a lot of times the technology gets brought in, but then what is going to happen to the process? How is that going to change? And then if people don't have the right mindset going into it, again, they just might say, well, this is just another transformational change that may not stick. And I think as well, you mentioned AI. I mean, and I think generative AI specifically, it's such a big change that really people need to understand that they need to get on board.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So moving on and related to that, how do you think about facilitating digital transformation, like human digital transformation at scale across complex organizations, right? Because we're not talking about just a couple people, businesses here, right?
So again, I think that one of the big challenges is it depends on the organization. So how the company really works underneath the water of the iceberg kind of thing is key. So for instance, I've worked in a lot of organizations, maybe more on the decentralized side of things. And if you just go with the top down, it just doesn't work. On the flip side, if it's just bottom up, either it's not going to work. It has to kind of be the two of them coming together, working seamlessly to actually get to that point where you actually have the change that you want to actually see. And I think that that's a challenging situation to be in. But if you do it that way and fits the culture of your company, you actually have a lot better results. I mean, cookie cutter is just not going to cut it.
Right. And now that hybrid, or like now you're added with the added challenge, I feel like, of not having everyone in the same place at the same time, at least not physically. So like, what do you have to say about that?
So I think that one of the key things is that, whichever way you look at it, it's going to be a hybrid world going forward.
Yeah.
And, just the nature of the way we do business now, because of the post-COVID situation, is such that really now we're used to thinking, okay, we don't need to just do it physically together, first thing, but maybe more importantly, it's like maybe the right people that we need to have in the virtual room are all over the world, and therefore we need to work for that. So like I've been in situations where, we'll have a morning meeting in Europe, which is like, looking to the east, the evening one is looking west. And then you bring those two groups together to kind of figure out, like at the end, like how you're actually going to finish off the project. But it's the case that you actually go in with that right away kind of thinking, because you want to make sure you get all the voices in the room and get to the right conclusion.
Right. So you mentioned having multiple different meetings at different time zones to be able to accommodate people all over the world. What other practices have you seen that work well in trying to like meet people where they're at?
Well, I think one of the key things as well is that, if we actually did get people into the physical room, we don't just go right into the business. It's a case that you want people to actually be comfortable with each other, trust each other, and actually be able to kind of really collaborate and bring the best of that group together. So I think that's absolutely critical. And a lot of times we skip it. We just kind of say,
Mm.
okay, yeah, we schedule the meeting, we'll get going or whatever else. And then you notice further down the road, you've actually lost a lot of time, and you actually have to go back and buttress those bridges and the like to make them hold the weight of actually what you want to actually achieve. So I think that's really critical, is building the trust together as a group, and then going forth and actually trying to figure out, how we're going to actually solve the problems, because usually they're big problems and they're global problems, and we need to actually work together on these things.
So would you say then that a good approach would be like trying to organize some kind of in-person session initially that allows some of these bonds to form, and then maybe the rest of it can continue in a way that's more hybrid or with virtual channels facilitated? Like, is that even a realistic thing?
Well, actually, a great point. So I think these days it's not something we always have the luxury of being able
Right,
to fly in people from all over the world in that type of way.
right.
Having said that, pre-COVID, when one of my former positions, I was in the World Wildlife Fund. It was a completely virtual team, and one thing that we did do is actually come together at least once a year. So
Mhm.
we did have that communal time together to discuss the next year, just keep knowing each other, and the new members of the team getting to know the rest of the team, that kind of stuff. And that was absolutely critical.
Mhm.
And especially with a big virtual team, if you have that luxury, it's a great investment. But like you say, it's something where sometimes it's just not possible. And I don't think that it's a prelude. You can't say, okay, without that, I can't go forward. We can do a lot of it virtually. But again, it's maybe not the first meeting, the first day is like completely into the work. It's like, who are the other people? Who are the other humans across across the screen?
Right. So you would want to, even in a virtual, or maybe especially in that virtual world, you
Yeah,
would want
exactly.
to taking some time to facilitate a conversation that isn't just like, all right, agenda item number one to,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. As a facilitator myself for virtual sessions, I think that there's actually so much more people could be doing to your point, to help people recognize the humans on the other end
Yeah.
before launching into the items that need to be discussed. So that's a fantastic point. Anything else that you've seen work well in kind of facilitating change across hybrid teams?
So I think the other thing too is that I mean, we have lots of tools, and in case whatever tools we have to kind of keep the dialogue open. So we've seen a lot more move nowadays to more kind of really chat-based functions, in the internal social media network, you might say, and to just have that continuous, so that we can't all work synchronously. So asynchronously, hey, I've got a question that came up, like for instance. And again, if it's a really global project and you have this east-west kind of divide of the team,
Mhm.
it's continuous then. And that's a great thing as well, because then it's the case that they can work offline when other people are sleeping as well.
Right, right, which can be like a super efficient when you think about it.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's almost like kind of going to sleep and the elves have done the work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. One of our team members is in Bulgaria, and it is pretty amazing to wake up in the morning and she's already done like a few hours of work, you know?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah. Awesome. So in terms of, switching tracks a little bit to talk about AI specifically, I'm curious to hear what you think some of the biggest challenge, like we know some of the opportunities, right? But what are some of the challenges to the way AI has been evolving, especially from, your perspective of these like complex, larger organizations?
Yeah. So I think that one of the key things is that, in contrast, like to a startup like yours, for instance, I mean, can get the team together and kind of say, okay, tomorrow we're going to do X and pivot.
Yeah.
And in the big organization, the first thing that comes up is, okay, what is the risk here? What's the downside, and what hurdles do we have to get past to actually to be able to move forward? So I think that's a huge problem, but it's something that's mitigatable. I mean, it's a case that, we have, like, for instance, big organization policies, there's ways of doing work and everything else. And even though each emerging technology has its own particularities, which we figure out as we go, especially like, for instance, generative AI right now, they still have some fundamental risks, and we can build for those. We can say, okay, we don't have a policy yet on X, like generative AI, but you still have to kind of keep the idea of the reputation of the company in mind. You still have to keep information confidential. So all those things kind of expand out. And then once you've actually started to actually move towards, okay, generative AI, we really need to work about X, Y, and Z for our company, that's when you can start to build in the policies and the like. So I think that that's one of the big things, is that we shouldn't let that paralysis kind of hold us back. It's really like, for instance, what can we do today? And for instance, in that regard, one of the things is, like, for instance, okay, well, we set out the normal things that you shouldn't be using external tools for, and therefore, but you can experiment with it yourself. You can actually try some things out that are, like, for instance, on public data and things that you can just to get a feel for what it's useful for, and you can actually go forward. So I mean, I think that's one of the mentality differences is that, okay, it might not be a well-known quantity yet, but there's some things you can do to get familiar, so that once we've caught up with the making sure things are safe, that we can actually use it, that we can continue with that.
Interesting. So you bring up a couple of things that I think are really interesting. Number one, and we've noticed this too, because at Virtual Sapiens, of course, our technology is pretty cutting edge, especially because we're looking more at the behavioral aspect of communication, right? Like the generative AI text-based verbal analysis, is people are used to that by now. So we do deal with a lot of video stuff, and it's been interesting to talk to some of these larger organizations, and they actually don't have any kind of policies in place to even know what questions they should be asking in some ways, right? And so, like, we of course have the benefit of, like, everything we've done is privacy first, so that's helpful. But to your point, like, so much of this is going so fast that many companies are like, we don't even know like what questions to ask, what safeguards to put in place. And that's, like, really hard.
Yeah, and like you say, it just changes so quickly. So I mean, even a couple months ago, ChatGPT didn't actually, take, do visual, and now it does. And I mean, it's a case again, they just bring out these things just so quickly, and then we're waiting with bated breath about what Gemini will actually come from Google. But it's a case that, again, is that going to change the game again, or is it just going to be getting on par with OpenAI again, and they're going to, kind of go off, or is the open source community really going to kind of rise to the challenge and actually bring us a better model? I mean, there's just so many questions.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so you mentioned that in some cases you can have the policy kind of risk component working through its processes, which just are slow with good reason. But then you can almost have a sandbox environment of testing. Is that what you meant?
Well, that's one way of going about it as well. I mean, even like, for instance, that, when you're actually working with external parties, that you're actually not using any of your real data. I mean, like, for instance, you can use dummy data and actually test out, how does the system really work? I mean, and if if you actually have the team of data scientists and the like, they just churn out some data for you and say, okay, how would this look? And then analyze it both ways, and then see what comes out the other side. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done very quickly, but not have a lot of risk. But again, to get to that point where then it's like, okay, yes, this is really going to be something that really changes the game for us, and we want to take the risk properly, takes a bit longer to do, but it's definitely doable.
Yeah. And what do you think is the most, like, exciting part of AI specifically in terms of its forces of change?
Well, I think that, in the last year, what we've seen is that, originally we've heard a lot of things about how AI was going to take over jobs and things like this. And the automation piece is a much smaller part of it than the augmentation piece. I mean, what it actually helps to do faster, often with better quality as well, especially for less experienced people, actually is so powerful that will be where the biggest gains come from. But that's going to really have fundamental change in how people think about their work. Instead of blank sheet of paper and filling it. It's a case might be that, you get a draft from like an OpenAI or something, and then you edit it.
Yeah.
And again, that's a kind of a mentality change that we're going to have to see if it actually makes sense first. And then second of all, that if it does, well then, actually using that is going to be a very different way of working.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And going back to your point earlier, getting the people of the organization used to using some of these tools, because like habits around content creation and things like that are very strong, right? And so I've noticed even with myself, like I've had to really remind myself, like, oh, like that would be a perfect question for ChatGPT, or like this is actually a question much more suited to like Google search, or both, right? You want to like confirm and double check references, but the behavioral part is that's
Yeah, and I think as well, when you see that blank kind of line, if it's in, one of the large language models, or you see it in Google, the first impulse is keyword, keyword, keyword.
Mhm.
And it's a case that, a large language model is a chat, it's in the name, and it's really something where it's iterative. It's like something go back and forth, versus like Google is actually more going, kind of like throwing a frisbee to a dog. Here, go fetch.
Right. Right. Yeah, I like that analogy. That makes, a ton of sense. And the iterative nature of the AI, generative AI piece, I think is often missed by people. You ask that first question, you get the answer, and you're like, either you're going to take that answer at face value, or which is dangerous in and of itself,
Exactly.
or you're not satisfied with it, right? And it's like actually
Yep.
you can, like, it's like a partnership a little bit.
Exactly. And I think as well, there's things like, character.ai, there's pi.ai, there's lots of, conversational agents there that like really is meant to be almost like a companion. And like in the same way with work, it could be a work companion. It could be someone who's actually helping you with your work, being your sparring partner. And the nice thing about generative AI as well, you can instruct it and say, okay, that's what I want you to do in this case. And then after you've gotten to a point where you see your answer and you're like, I'm not really sure about that, you can get it to tweak it and have a completely different personality to actually have a go at that. So I think that that's the fascinating part about it. And it's a case that, we don't all have to be programmers and this kind of stuff to get those kind of results. What went from an 8-month project last year could be in days now.
Right. And that's amazing.
Yeah.
So zooming out a little bit, I know we just were talking about AI specifically, but what, application of technology, and you can talk more about AI, of course, too, but are you most excited about?
So about 2 years ago, I was asked a similar question, and I said, okay, 2022 is definitely going to be the year of augmented, like, augmented reality and augmented intelligence. And I would say, like, we've talked a lot about AI, but AI could also be augmented intelligence. And I think that, with Apple coming out with their, device next year, it's a case that I think together it will be very much an augmented world. Now, having said that, especially because of the price point of Apple's, device, it's going to be, a very kind of long kind of introduction, you might say, from the point of view of us getting, the average person getting access to that kind of technology. But I think that that's the way it's going to be. It's very much about augmenting. It's about, increasing our abilities with these tools.
Right.
And over time, that will evolve and get more widespread as well. But I think that, I think maybe 2024, maybe 2025 will be the year of augmented.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Have you tried any of those, not VR, but as you said, like augmented tools yet?
So to be honest with you, no. And it's like, for instance, so I have had a VR headset for a couple of years. And again, it's like, for instance, it's a classic, you don't have the great content, then, the device is just not going to, kind of sell and can keep going kind of thing. So my fingers are crossed that Apple can figure it out, and hopefully at a much lower price point by the time we hit 2025. But it's something where, I think that those are going to be some key things. Let's see if we get it right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like I feel like VR, AR, and like the metaverse have like taken a back seat a little bit while
Yeah,
AI
definitely.
has come front and center. And it's also funny to think about, even a couple years ago, like all anyone wanted to talk about was the crypto blockchain.
Yeah.
But all of these technologies are constantly evolving, right? And
definitely. And I think this is the thing, is that we've had those discussions. There's been a lot of interesting things that have come out of that. And over the next few years as well, whichever things kind of are popular and emerging technologies, the kind of how these things actually work together. I mean, again, AI is just like, for instance, like electricity, at the turn of the 20th century. So it's a case that, from that point of view, it could really just be an enabler for general purpose applications. And all these areas might explode again just because it's actually now possible.
Yeah. And I think because I'm always so focused on like the physical experience for people, I'll be really curious to see whatever manifestation of this kind of AR technology can work flexibly with people so that it, because glasses are hard, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone wears glasses. It's your face is such a big part of your identity. So for everyone to be walking around with the same glasses, I think is an unlikely ask of society.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, so if not glasses for everyone, then like what?
Yeah.
But really interesting stuff. Any other thoughts, David, before we
No,
go?
I mean, I think that, going back to kind of and wrapping that up, I think that one of the key things is that we really have to be mindful of the technology, and how we use it and how we interact with it. We can't be complacent. And I think that, that's one of the key things is that, like, as this stuff gets better, we're going to be going, oh yeah, it's going to give me, 9 out of 10 answers that are right. I'll just go with the 10th one. And I think that that's where we really have to kind of step back and say, always have a critical eye on what it's bringing back to us, and always think about, what are the bigger implications for us as humans, and and how we actually go about using these things. I think that's so critical, and it's something that's often missed, especially in the technology side of things.
Absolutely, that's such a great reminder that'll bring this talk show to a close. So, David, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise. I mean, as someone who's so involved in technology and digital transformation, it's really interesting to hear both on like the process side of how some of these changes have to happen, but then also like some of the technologies you're looking at. So if anyone has further questions for you, what's the best way for them to be in touch with you?
Yeah, so definitely LinkedIn. So I check it too often. And it's the case that I'm very happy to link up on LinkedIn and, discuss things further and the like. So yeah, that'd be great if people want to join and continue the discussion there.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, David, thank you again. And to all of our audience members out there, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you very much, Rachel.